My name is Jack Thorne. For over 3 years, I've been running from the SCP Foundation. This is my story. Last night, I found myself sitting at the Lonely Cat Cafe at 2 a.m. Sure, it calls itself a cafe, but really it's just a sleazy diner for truckers to relax and middle-class men to meet their prostitutes. I love it there because I can get some thinking done without the distraction of my notebooks calling out to me from the closet. If I'm not careful, I can spend all night obsessively reading them, so the cafe forces me to think of something else, something happier. I was eating some carrot cake while thinking of my next move when Daisy offered me another cup of coffee. "Fill you up, hun?" she offered. Daisy worked the third shift at the cafe. She was a real salt-on-the-earth type, always willing to listen, never judging me for being out all night at a place like this. I always had a feeling she liked me. The way she leaned over the counter while pouring my coffee only served to confirm my suspicions. It's not in my nature to date, but Daisy has done so much in listening to my ramblings over the past few months. I pulled out a cigarette and sucked on it for strength before asking, "Hey, I started. You ever go out with low-life scum like me?" Daisy turned around and smirked. "No, but I'll go out with you. Wait until I finish my shift, okay?" I smirked while rolling the cigarette between my teeth. I figured it would be nice to have one fun night. What followed was an hour and a half of reading newspapers and drinking endless refills of coffee. It's sick how the world is turning out. Some poor girl or guy going missing seamlessly every day of the week. I hoped for more. Eventually, Daisy finished and found her coat. She walked to the front door and gestured for me to join her. I dropped some money on the counter, pulled my jacket off the back of my chair, and made my way to the front. There isn't much to do at 4 a.m., making it difficult to take a fine woman out. Luckily, Daisy was as accustomed to the night as I was and knew exactly what to do. She hailed a cab and gave the driver an address I've never heard of. When we arrived, I saw it was a movie theater that had no sign. What theater doesn't want to advertise its movies? Well, a dirty theater. We caught the 4:30 showing of whatever dirty flick was on and made fun of the cheesy acting from the back row. Although the movie was explicit, Daisy was a lady, so I didn't try anything. Once the movie was over, I took her home. It was the best evening I'd had in years, so I knew the happiness couldn't last. The next night was pouring rain. I made my way into the cafe and took off my hat, flicking it at the ground to get the water off. Daisy greeted me with a sideways smile, chewing gum and asking me how my day was. I shot her a big grin and took my seat. "Hold on a sec, hun," she said, reaching for a trash bag and her umbrella. As soon as the door closed behind her, I heard the gunshot. In that second, my happiness was over. I jumped over the counter and sprinted out the back door where Daisy had been just a moment ago. I looked down and saw her. Daisy was lying crumpled up by the dumpster, trash bag still in hand. I looked up and saw the murderer run behind a corner. I didn't think. I ran as fast as I could towards the assailant, but as I turned the corner, the guy was gone. Tears running, I turned back to Daisy and she was gone too. What the hell? I thought. I ran back to the cafe door and shoved it open, immediately staring into Daisy's deep, soulful eyes. She was standing there, shivering with cold and staring blankly at the wall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I didn't think twice. I ran to the back office where I knew Daisy's boss Merle was working. "I need this, Merle!" I shouted as I ripped his coat off the back of the chair he was sitting on. All he could do was yell something indiscernible through a mouthful of chips. "Also, Daisy's going home now. Martha will cover." I shouted over my shoulder as I rushed Daisy out of the cafe. She didn't resist. Daisy just walked in speaking as I ushered her into a cab, then into her apartment on the east side of town. As soon as I swung open the door to her apartment, Daisy sat on the couch on the far side of the room. I put my hand on her forehead, but she wasn't feverish. "God, Daisy," I said. "I don't know what's going on, but I think you need to rest." Daisy didn't answer. Instead, she just lay down on the couch and went to sleep. "Something screwy is going on here," I muttered before lying down on the floor beside the couch and sleeping. Seemingly right away, I was woken back up. The sun had risen, and Daisy had opened all the windows. I'm not usually one for being up during the day, so it was quite a shock to be forced awake by so much light. I sat up groggily, looking around the tiny apartment for any sign of coffee. Then I remembered Daisy. I rushed around the apartment and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, laughing and talking excitedly on the phone. I breathed a heavy sigh of relief. She'd returned to her usual self. Daisy put down the phone, then immediately returned to the dreary facial expression she had last night. Her face seemed full of so much worry and doubt. She then picked up some paper and started drawing graphs. I tried grabbing her hand, but she rustled me off. "What are you doing, Daisy?" I asked quietly. Daisy answered with a monotonal voice. unlike anything I've ever heard her use before. I've just secured a job that will pay me a living wage to work during the daytime. Night shift workers are 23.6% less productive because they sleep an average of 52.4% less than average people. I'd never heard her use math before. She was always messing up the cost of everything at the cafe. I grabbed Daisy by the shoulders, but she continued to draw graphs on the paper in front of her. "Daisy, you're scaring me," I said. "Then leave," she replied. I went back to my apartment, upset and confused by what I'd seen. I didn't even recognize the woman I'd woken up to that day. I tried to get some sleep, but I couldn't stop tossing and turning all day. I went back to the cafe that night, but Daisy wasn't there. Merle was there, yelling all kinds of expletives, upset that Daisy had called earlier in the day to quit. No notice given. I left the cafe and went back to Daisy's house. I looked through her window and saw her sleeping. She looked peaceful. The house was thoroughly cleaned from top to bottom. I couldn't believe it. This couldn't be the same messy train wreck of a woman I'd just been out on a date with. The woman that works all night and sleeps all day. The woman that couldn't keep a cafe countertop clean, let alone an entire apartment. Memories of the SCP started crawling back into my mind, but I didn't want to think of the SCP Foundation right now. My heart ached, even contemplating what I knew I was thinking. I wouldn't allow myself to think these thoughts. I couldn't, but I knew I must. There was no way around it. I walked home. I was in no rush to arrive. As soon as I walked through the door, I opened my closet full of notebooks. All the SCPs I knew about were in there. There were hundreds of SCPs I'd met or been told about written into these books, many of which were burned to my mind from bitter experience. Since breaking out of the SCP Foundation, I'd hoped to never look back. But here I was, surrounded by my notebooks once again. It didn't take me long to find it. SCP-069, Body Snatcher. This sneaky devil takes the form of a recently deceased body, causing the original to disintegrate. It was a creature that craved order, which was why it organized Daisy's life. I knew what had to happen. I had to capture this creature pretending to be Daisy. A tear rolled down my cheek. The Daisy I knew was gone. This was one of the damn creatures I tried so hard to escape. The creatures I'd been locked up with. I had to be careful. If the creature died, its current body would also disintegrate. The creature would also somehow teleport itself to the most recently deceased body somewhere else in the world. I put my book down, grabbed a bread knife from my kitchen bench, and started the long walk back to Daisy's apartment. I knew I shouldn't kill the creature, but I could make it suffer for what it did to Daisy. I'd cut it, make it feel the pain I was feeling. I'd rough it up, then tie it to a chair before calling the SCP Foundation and have it extracted. My plan was airtight, until I turned a corner and saw the scene playing out in front of Daisy's apartment. Daisy was outside with her hands on the back of her head. She was standing illuminated by a bright spotlight. At least 24 men with guns surrounding her.
"Don't you move, creature!"
One of the men yelled out. I knew what I had to say to get past these men. I walked out to the nearest officer and quickly flashed an expired police badge before sternly saying, "Let me through. Clearance level 5. Flustered by my stern voice and quick pace, the low-level soldier moved aside, and I walked right up to Daisy with my knife. Then I looked into her deep, soulful eyes once again. I couldn't do it. What if it was really her? I couldn't hurt Daisy of all people. Before I knew it, Daisy had thrown her arms around me, pulling herself into my knife. The knife slid smoothly through her chest and into her heart. She then smiled and drew close for a kiss. As soon as her lips touched mine, the creature disintegrated into fine dust, picked up by the wind and blown to the sky. The surrounding men let out a loud, frustrated groan.
"That's exactly what we're supposed not to allow happen. Who the hell is this guy?"
Oh hell, I suddenly thought, and threw myself to the ground, but didn't hit the ground. Instead, I fell through the ground and sat just beneath the surface, melting into the shadow cast by the building.
"He's one of them! Son of a bitch, find him!"
The soldiers immediately scattered, looking for me everywhere. If I'm going to survive these guys and avoid being caught again, I'll have to be smarter about how I operate. That will have to start with finding out more about the SCP organization and how they run. I knew what I had to do next, but first, I would have to change my identity.